He thought he was just sharing a sandwich. She thought no one would ever look at her without judgment again. But when a struggling single dad offers his last meal to a silent, mud-covered girl on a church step, he has no idea he's just met the heir to thousands of acres of forgotten land and the woman who will change his life forever. This isn't a story about charity. It's a story about choosing to stay, about the quiet power of kindness, and how a ranch no one believed in became the heart of a second chance for 3 broken souls. If you believe in the kind of stories that restore your faith in people, if you love characters who heal not with grand gestures, but with patience, honesty, and a little shared silence, then take a second to subscribe and join us. We're just getting started, and trust me, you'll want to stay till the last page. The air smelled of old motor oil and morning frost, familiar, grounding, a kind of comfort that Noah Carter had grown to appreciate. He stood at the edge of his garage, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped thermos that had survived more than a few accidental drops. The same couldn't be said for most things in his life. Across the street, autumn leaves chased each other like restless children in the wind, brushing against the cracked sidewalks of Maple Street. It was a small town in the western corner of Colorado where nothing much changed, and everyone knew who fixed their cars, who didn't mow their lawns, and who still left milk out for stray cats. Noah was one of those people, predictable, private, but always kind. He wiped his hands on a rag and glanced at the wall clock inside the shop. 4:37 p.m. Time to close up. He never stayed past 5, not because he had someplace to be, but because there was someone waiting. "Grace'll be hungry," he mumbled to himself, a habit formed over a decade of fatherhood. He grabbed his jacket, locked the tools away, and left the garage with a paper bag holding 2 sandwiches, peanut butter and banana, Grace's favorite, and the other one never made it home. The walk to the park wasn't long. Just a few blocks past the old church, down a path flanked by maples, turning rust-colored under the early fall sun. The park bench, near the fountain that hadn't worked in years, had become a quiet ritual. That's where he usually found someone who needed a hot meal more than he did, but tonight was different. A fine drizzle began to fall as he reached the bench. No familiar faces, no quiet nods from the regulars, just a figure, small, hunched, barely moving, curled beneath the awning of the church steps. She wasn't from around here. That much was obvious. She sat with her knees drawn tight. To her chest, fingers clutched around the frayed sleeves of a coat that had seen better decades. Mud caked the hem of her jeans, and her shoes, no laces, no soles, were soaked through. But it was her face that stopped him. Not because she was striking, though she was in a weathered, worn sort of way. It was her eyes, wide, hollow, waiting for the world to stop kicking her. Noah hesitated, then walked over slowly, his voice low and even. "Evening. You okay?" She didn't answer, just glanced at him, guarded but not hostile. He crouched down, keeping a respectful distance. "I've got an extra sandwich. Banana and peanut butter. Not fancy, but it sticks to the ribs." Still no answer. Her eyes flicked to the bag in his hand, then away again. "You don't have to talk," he said gently, setting the sandwich beside her. "Just eat. It's cold out." He stood, prepared to walk away, when her voice, barely above a whisper, broke the silence. "Why?" Noah turned. "Why what?" "Why give it to me?" He offered a soft smile. "Because someone once gave me their last sandwich. Changed everything." She blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. "And now you pay it forward?" Something like that. He turned again, then hesitated, pulled off his old work jacket and walked back to her. "Here. You look colder than I do." She stared at it, then at him, suspicion softening just a little. "I'm not a thief." "I didn't say you were. Just someone who might need a jacket." Slowly, almost reverently, she took it. The rain had grown steadier now, and Noah nodded. Once before heading back toward home, sandwichless, jacketless, but oddly lighter. Grace greeted him with her usual whirlwind of chatter, her inhaler clutched in one hand and a library book in the other. At 10 years old, she was a head full of curiosity and lungs full of fragility. He handed her the sandwich and listened to her recount her day. Science class, a boy named Joey who kept pulling her braids, and how Mrs. Pendergrass read them Charlotte's Web and made everyone cry. As Grace talked, Noah's mind drifted back to the church steps. There had been something haunting about the girl, something unspoken, not pity. He hated that word, but a recognition, a kind of soul weariness he knew too well, a life that hadn't gone according to plan. He didn't even know her name. That night, as Grace drifted off to sleep under her horse-patterned quilt, Noah sat by the window with his coffee. Rain tapped gently on the glass. He thought of the girl again, wondered if she had found somewhere dry to sleep, wondered why someone like her, with eyes like that, ended up under a church awning with nothing but worn shoes and silence. He didn't know that 30 minutes after he left, she unwrapped the sandwich slowly, almost ceremonially, and ate every bite. That she buried her face in his jacket, letting it soak up the tears she hadn't shed in weeks. That she hadn't felt safe in months, but tonight, under the dripping eaves of an old church, she did. And he certainly didn't know that the girl he'd just given his last meal to was the legal heir to over 3,000 acres of the most valuable ranch land in the state. But all that would come later. Tonight it was just a sandwich, just another Tuesday, but maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something more. Morning came with a soft haze rolling over the hills, brushing against the town like a sigh too tired to stir the air. Noah rose early, same as always, not because he had to, but because silence before the world woke up gave him a kind of peace he hadn't found in years. Grace was still asleep upstairs. He could hear the soft rhythm of her breathing, the occasional wheeze that kept him alert even in his sleep. He'd long since learned to sleep light. Fatherhood had rewired his body and his soul in equal measure. He packed her lunch, kissed her forehead gently, and left a note by the cereal box like he did every morning. "You are brave. You are strong. You are my reason. Dad." It was his ritual. Grace never mentioned the notes, but she saved every single one in a shoebox beneath her bed. Noah drove the pickup to the garage, his usual route taking him past the church steps. He slowed. She was gone. Only the faint imprint of her sitting figure remained on the damp stone, and his old work jacket was folded neatly on the bench nearby, dry, clean, and placed with the kind of care that said, "Thank you," louder than words. But what caught his eye was the glint of something silver tucked beneath the collar of the jacket. He stepped out of the truck, curious, cautious, and picked it up. It was a pendant, a small silver feather, delicate and slightly tarnished, hanging from a leather cord. It didn't look valuable in the way diamonds did, but there was history in the etching, in the way the metal had softened with wear. It was well-loved, clearly important. He turned it over and found initials scratched into the back in elegant, old-fashioned script. EMR. He stared at it, a quiet hum of questions stirring inside him. Who was she? Where had she gone? And why leave something that felt like a part of her? He slipped the feather into his shirt pocket and folded the jacket over his arm. Maybe she'd come back. Maybe she had somewhere else to be. But something told him she didn't have many places left. Back at the shop, the day passed in the usual. Rhythm, oil changes, busted radiators, small-town conversations with folks who needed more therapy than car repair. Noah was good with machines. They made sense. People, not so much. Still, his mind drifted again and again to the girl. Her silence had said more than some people's shouting. He had no idea what her story was, but his gut told him it was. A hard one. That night, as he tucked Grace in, she noticed the feather pendant on his nightstand. "That's pretty," she said, blinking sleepily. "Is it Mom's?" Noah froze for a second, then smiled and shook his head. "No, sweet pea. It belonged to someone I met yesterday." "Are you going to give it back?" "I hope so." Grace turned on her side, her voice muffled against the pillow. "Then maybe you should write her a note, like you do for me." He chuckled. "You think that works for everyone?" "It works for me," she said simply, and within minutes she was asleep. Noah stared at her for a long moment, then sat at the kitchen table, an old, spiral-bound notebook in front of him. He wasn't one for letters, but somehow the girl's quiet had created an ache in him, a need to say something even if no one read it. He scribbled quickly, awkwardly. "To the girl with the quiet eyes, I don't know your name, or where you're from, or what brought you to those church steps. But I know Grace when I see it. You didn't ask for help, but you didn't turn it away either. You reminded me that sometimes the smallest things, a sandwich, a jacket, can still matter. I found something of yours. I'll keep it safe. If you ever want it back, or just want to sit a while, you'll find me at the old garage off Maple. No questions, no judgment, just coffee and company. Noah." He folded the note and tucked it inside the jacket pocket, hanging it on the coat hook near the door. Just in case. The week passed quietly. No word, no girl, no trace. But something had changed in Noah. He found himself looking up more often, glancing toward the door whenever the bell above the garage chimed, listening, hoping, wondering. Then, on Friday evening, just as the sun dipped low and painted the garage windows with amber and gold, she returned. He didn't hear her come in. One minute he was wiping down a workbench. The next, he looked up. And there she was, standing just inside the doorway. Like a ghost made flesh, same coat, same worn jeans, but this time her hair was tied back, her eyes clearer. "Hi," she said softly. Noah nodded as if she'd only stepped out for a coffee. "Evening." She looked at the jacket on the hook, then at him. "You kept it. You left it. And the necklace." He pulled the silver feather from his pocket and placed it on the counter. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. "Thank you." He didn't ask what it meant to her. He didn't ask about the initials. Instead, he poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot near his workbench and offered her one. They sat together in silence, not the awkward kind, the kind that understood. After a while, she spoke. "Ellie. My name's Ellie." "Noah," he replied. "And that's Grace, my daughter. She says I should write more notes." Ellie smiled faintly, tracing the pendant with her fingers. "She sounds smart." "She is," he said. "Gets it from her mother." The room quieted again. Outside, the sun was nearly gone, leaving behind only the warmth of its afterglow and the flicker of something new, fragile, uncertain, but undeniably present. Not a rescue, not a romance, not yet, but maybe the start of belonging, in the quietest way. Saturday mornings in Meadowrun were slow and sacred. The sun always seemed to rise more gently on weekends, casting soft gold over the rooftops and coaxing steam from cups of diner coffee before anyone spoke a word. It was the kind of town where time didn't rush, and that was just fine with Noah Carter. He stood outside his garage, the old sign swaying above him in the breeze. Carter's Auto and Diesel, hand-painted by his late wife, back when they still believed in fresh starts and glossy tomorrows. Inside, Grace was curled up in the corner with her book, a small portable heater beside her and a blanket around her legs. She loved spending Saturdays at the shop, being near her dad, breathing in the scent of motor oil and worn leather like it was part of her DNA. And Noah didn't mind the company. Ellie hadn't come back since Tuesday. He didn't expect her to. But still, part of him watched the door more often than before. Not out of worry, not even curiosity, just hope. So when the bell above the shop door rang shortly after 10, Noah instinctively looked up. But it wasn't Ellie. It was a man in his late 60s, sharp-dressed and out of place, pressed slacks, a suede blazer, and a fedora that looked more Manhattan than Meadow Run. His presence was like someone had dropped a briefcase on a rocking chair porch, too polished for this town. "Morning," the man said, voice smooth like a politician's. "Are you Mr. Carter?" Noah stepped out from behind the counter, wiping, his hands on a rag. "That depends on who's asking." The man smiled, revealing unnervingly perfect teeth. "Name's Weston Fielding. I'm looking for someone. Thought you might have seen her." He pulled out a photo. A candid shot. Grainy, and a few years old, but unmistakably Ellie. Noah's face didn't move. "Why would I have seen her?" "Because she's been seen in this area," Fielding said, slipping the photo back into his coat. "And because she tends to drift toward people who extend kindness." Noah studied him. "That a crime now?" Fielding's smile tightened. "Not at all, but Eleanor McAllister has a history of disappearing, usually right before something big is expected of her." The name landed like a stone in a still pond. McAllister. It was a name that meant something in this state. Noah knew it the way you know the name of a brand you'll never afford. McAllister Ranch had been the beating heart of Oak County for generations. Land, cattle, timber, and quiet power. "Ellie." "Eleanor?" He said nothing. Fielding reached into his blazer again, this time pulling out an envelope. "If you see her, give her this. It's important." Noah hesitated, then took it. The envelope was unsealed. Inside was a map, an old hand-drawn survey of land that stretched for thousands of acres, with a star marked over Oak River Ranch. A handwritten note in elegant script read, "It's still yours. Come home." Noah looked up. "She doesn't seem like someone who wants to be found." "She never does," Fielding said. "But if she's here, Mr. Carter, tell her the ranch won't wait forever." And just like that, he left. Polished shoes clicking softly on the pavement, his car disappearing down the road like he hadn't just dropped a quiet bomb in the middle of Noah's morning. That night, as Grace brushed her teeth upstairs and the house settled into its soft creaks and sighs, Noah stood in the kitchen holding the map, Oak River Ranch. He'd heard of it, rumors mostly. The McAllisters had once owned half the county, but after Eleanor's mother passed, the land had become the center of a legal battle. Something about Ellie walking away from it all. The town had moved on, as towns do, but Noah couldn't shake. The image of Ellie curled under the church awning, hollow-eyed and silent. That wasn't just someone hiding, that was someone trying not to be found. He thought about burning the letter, or driving the envelope out past city limits and tossing it into the canyon winds, but instead he did something different. On Sunday morning, Grace bounced into the kitchen. "Can we go somewhere?" Noah poured her orange juice. "Like where?" She shrugged. "Anywhere with horses." He paused, looked at the map again. Something in him shifted, an intuition. Quiet but insistent. "All right," he said. "Let's go on a drive." They followed the map, past the silos and gravel roads, beyond the last gas station and the broken fence line with rusted license plates nailed into the wood. The drive took nearly an hour, winding through groves of golden aspen until the land opened up. Wide, breathing, ancient, Oak River Ranch wasn't abandoned, not completely. The house was weather-worn, but still standing, its porch sagging like a tired smile. The barn had a new lock. The fields were overgrown but not wild. There were signs of someone living there, tracks in the dirt, a stack of firewood, a wheelbarrow half filled with soil and tools. Noah parked the truck. "Is this it?" Grace whispered. "I think so." They walked quietly, not wanting to intrude, but unable to turn back. Something about the place felt sacred, old, rooted in more than just soil. At the barn door, Grace stopped. "Look," she said. On the ground, half buried in straw, was a carved wooden plaque, faded but still legible, in memory of Margaret McAllister. May this land heal the broken. Noah crouched, brushed the dust from the edges. He didn't know Ellie's full story yet, but he was beginning to understand that she hadn't run away. She had returned. And maybe, just maybe, this land wasn't just a ranch. Maybe it was a place to start over. The wind out at Oak River carried a different sound, fuller somehow, like it passed through memories on its way across the fields. Grace was the first to break the silence. "This place feels like a story," she whispered, eyes wide as she looked up at the old ranch house. "A sad one." Noah didn't respond at first. He was staring at the barn, the way the roof leaned gently to the right, like it had bowed over time from holding too much sorrow. The place wasn't abandoned, but it wasn't lived in either. It was in between, like Ellie herself. He turned to Grace. "Let's not go poking around. We're guests, not ghosts." Grace nodded solemnly, then reached out and gently touched the wooden plaque again, the one bearing Margaret McAllister's name. She traced the carved letters as if trying to understand them with her fingertips. She must have been someone important. She was someone's mother, Noah said quietly. That's always important. They didn't expect to find Ellie that day, but she found them. Noah had just turned to call Grace back to the truck when he saw movement near the stable, subtle, cautious, a shadow, then a shape. Ellie stepped out into the afternoon light, hands dusty, braid pulled over her shoulder, eyes unreadable. She didn't look angry, just tired. "Thought you might show up eventually," she said softly. Noah removed his cap and gave her a nod. "Didn't mean to intrude, just had a feeling." She looked at Grace, who stood beside her father, arms folded like a little soldier, but eyes curious. Ellie softened. "Your daughter's the one with good instincts." Grace grinned. "Hi, Miss Ellie." Ellie gave a quiet smile in return. "Hi, Grace." A pause. Noah stepped forward. "We won't stay long. Just wanted to check the place out. It's beautiful out here." Ellie's gaze drifted toward the fields, golden and waving in the breeze. "It used to be." She didn't elaborate. Inside the barn, the light streamed through the slats in long, quiet stripes. Ellie moved like someone who belonged to the place but hadn't claimed it yet. Her hands brushing over beams, her fingers adjusting tools with unconscious familiarity. "This was my mother's heart," she said, not looking at them. "Not just her property. She could walk this barn blindfolded and still find the saddle she needed." Noah stood beside an old tack cabinet, careful not to touch anything. "And now it's yours." Ellie gave a small, dry laugh. "That's what the paperwork says. But this place doesn't feel like mine. Not yet." Grace had wandered to the stall. At the far end, where a soft whinny echoed, she gasped, "Daddy, there's a horse!" Noah moved quickly, scanning for danger but relaxed when he saw the mare, a chestnut beauty with wise eyes and a long scar down her right flank. "She's gentle," Ellie said, moving to the stall. She reached in and stroked the mare's neck. "This is Lacey. She was my mother's favorite. Got hurt in a storm a few years back, but she's tough." Grace extended her hand timidly. Lacey stepped forward, nuzzling her palm like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Lacey likes me," Grace beamed. Noah smiled, but Ellie's expression shifted, something between surprise and sadness. "I haven't seen her go near anyone in months," she murmured. They stood like that for a while, 3 people and a horse sharing something wordless, something bigger than introductions. Later, Ellie invited them inside the ranch house. It was rustic and warm in that neglected but loved way. The kitchen smelled faintly of herbs and firewood. A kettle sat on the stove, as if always ready. "I haven't had guests in years," she admitted, pouring tea into chipped mugs. "You're doing fine," Noah said. They sat around the table, Grace happily sipping warm cider while flipping through an old photo album Ellie had reluctantly placed before her. "She looks like you," Grace said, pointing to a picture of a young woman holding a newborn foal. Ellie nodded. That's my mom. She had kind eyes. She did, Ellie said, voice tightening. She also had cancer, the kind that doesn't care how good you are. Noah said nothing. He knew better than to interrupt someone finding the strength to speak pain aloud. Ellie went on, slowly, carefully. She left the ranch to me, but I didn't stay. I left right after the funeral. Noah met her eyes. Why? She looked down. Because everyone expected me to be her, to manage the land, the workers, the legacy, and all I felt was empty. She paused. So I ran. Spent 2 years doing odd jobs in cities that didn't ask questions. Then one night, I found myself back here. Only the horses remembered me. Grace reached across the table and touched her hand. Well, now we remember you too. Ellie blinked. For the first time since Noah had met her, she looked uncertain, maybe even hopeful. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Noah stood outside with her while Grace finished brushing Lacey. You ever think of reopening the ranch? He asked. Ellie shook her head. I don't even know where I'd begin. You already did, he said quietly. You stayed. They stood in silence. Not the heavy kind, just honest and full of things unsaid. Then Ellie turned to him. Why do you keep showing up, Noah? He considered his answer, hands in his jacket pockets, because when something feels worth showing up for, you don't walk away from it. Ellie looked away, but not before he saw it, the flicker in her eyes. Not fear, recognition. That night, as Noah drove Grace home under a sky blooming with stars, he thought about that barn, that house, that scarred mare, and that quiet girl with a silver feather and a stubborn heart. He thought about how land could hold grief and still be holy, and how maybe, just maybe, he was standing at the edge of something rare, not just a ranch, but a second chance. The days that followed moved gently, like leaves drifting on a slow stream, nothing rushed, nothing forced. But change, real and quiet, was happening all the same. Noah found himself driving out to Oak River more often. Not because Ellie asked, him too, but because the land started calling to something deep in him, some part of him that still believed in tending to broken things, and the ranch was full of them. Fences that leaned like old men with bad backs, gutters hanging loose like forgotten promises, a roof that whispered of storms weathered and ones still to come. He didn't ask Ellie for permission to fix anything. He just brought his tools, his quiet ways, and let his hands speak what his mouth wouldn't. At first Ellie would watch from a distance, arms folded, gaze unreadable. But after a few days, she brought him a thermos of coffee, then a sandwich, then a box of nails, set down beside the fence without a word. That was how they talked, through shared work, through silence filled with presence, through the kind of closeness that required no performance. Grace, of course, settled into the place as if it had always been hers. She spent hours with Lacey, brushing her, feeding her, whispering stories into her soft ears. Ellie showed her how to walk the perimeter of the paddock, how to listen to the ground with her feet, how to know when a storm was coming, not by the sky, but by the way the birds grew quiet. One afternoon, Grace ran up to Noah, cheeks flushed. Braids wild. Dad, Miss Ellie says I have a horse sense. Noah chuckled. Well, I've known you've had good sense for a long time. Guess horses agree. Ellie had stood nearby, smiling just a little before ducking her head, as if embarrassed by the warmth curling between them. One evening, as the sun slid low and bathed the fields in amber light, Noah and Ellie stood near the barn, leaning against the fence. They had worked all day replacing rotted boards and shoring up the west wall. Now tools lay neatly stacked, gloves hung out to dry, and a pair of hawks circled overhead. Place looks better already, Noah said, stretching his sore shoulder. It's not just the place, Ellie replied softly. It's the air. It feels lighter, he nodded, rubbing his palm with his thumb. Funny how something starts to breathe again when someone decides to care for it. She looked at him, really looked at him. What about you? She asked. Do you breathe better when you fix things? He shrugged. Some people carry their pain in their chest. I carry mine in my hands. Working with them keeps me honest. Ellie was silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, I carry mine in silence. It's easier to hold that way. Her voice didn't tremble, but it felt like a confession, and Noah treated it like one, with reverence and no attempt to rescue. Sometimes silence is just a seed, he said. All it needs is a little room to grow. She smiled then, small but real. You always speak like a man who's lived. 1,000 lives, just one, he said. But I've lost enough to learn how to listen. Later, they ate dinner on the back porch. Grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup served in mismatched bowls. Grace talked about her latest chapter book, and Ellie listened like she was hearing a symphony. There was no rush, no pretense, just the shared comfort of food and fireflies. After Grace went inside to call her grandmother, Noah lingered. Place ever have kids running around before? He asked. Ellie nodded. When I was little, summers were loud. We had riding lessons, harvest, picnics, games under the cottonwoods. I thought this place would always echo with laughter. And then, he asked gently, and then I grew up. He didn't push her, just let the quiet settle around them like a blanket. She appreciated that about him, how he knew when to speak and when to simply be there. Finally, Ellie whispered, Do you think it's possible to go back? Not just to a place, but to a feeling? He looked out over the land, shadows lengthening like soft sighs across the fields. I think some places never stop waiting for us, he said. And some feelings don't die. They just lie low until the right season wakes them. The next morning, Noah showed up with a surprise, 3 bundles of wood, paint cans, and a plan. We're building Grace a bunk in the loft, he said. Ellie raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Well, she's practically taken over that space already, he grinned. Figured we might as well make it official. She didn't protest, just nodded and handed him a cup of coffee. By afternoon, the two of them were sawing, hammering, sanding, and laughing, really laughing. Ellie had a quiet, raspy laugh that made Noah's chest tighten in a way that surprised him. At one point, she slipped and caught herself on the beam. Noah steadied her, his hands on her arms. They were close then, breath close. You okay? He asked. She nodded but didn't step back right away. Neither did he. It was the kind of moment that didn't shout, didn't even speak, just hummed quietly in the space between them. Then Grace called from below, and the moment passed. But it had happened, and both of them knew it. That night, as Noah drove home with Grace asleep in the back seat, the stars spilled across the sky like seeds flung by a hopeful hand. He thought about Ellie, about the way she looked when she watched the wind move through the wheat like it was something sacred, about the silence she wore like armor, and the way, now it had begun to crack. He didn't know what would happen, but he knew this. Some things were worth showing up for, even if they took time. Even if they came with weathered barns and painful memories and wounds that didn't scar straight. Because sometimes healing doesn't come with thunder. Sometimes it starts with a shared fence post, a warm bowl of soup, and a girl who says you have horse sense. And sometimes that's all you need to start again. It was the first Saturday of October, and Meadowrun's Harvest Festival painted the town in flannel, hay bales, and the warm scent of cinnamon and caramel apples. The sidewalks were crowded with neighbors greeting each other like family, and the town square brimmed with pumpkins, live music, and kids chasing dogs in Halloween costumes. Grace had begged to go, her eyes lit with the kind of hope only children seem allowed to hold without irony. It'll be good for her, Ellie had said softly. Noah nodded. And for you. Ellie hesitated, then glanced down at her worn jeans and flannel shirt. I haven't been to a festival in years. Then you're overdue. They arrived just past noon, the sky crisp and cloudless. Grace ran ahead to the craft tables, her braid bouncing as she made a beeline toward a booth filled with handmade friendship bracelets. Ellie trailed behind with Noah, walking beside him but not quite touching, close enough for comfort. Distant, enough to stay protected. "It's strange," she said as they passed the pie contest tent, "to be surrounded by people and still feel invisible." Noah looked at her. "Sometimes invisible's safer than being seen." She glanced up. "You know that from experience?" "I know it from surviving." Ellie said nothing, but her fingers curled slightly, like she wanted to take his hand and didn't know how. They found Grace near the music stage, holding a paper cup of hot apple cider and a string of beads she couldn't wait to show them. "I made one for Miss Ellie, too," she said proudly, handing her a bracelet threaded with tiny wooden letters that spelled "Brave." Ellie's breath caught. Grace beamed. "Because you are." Noah watched as Ellie slipped the bracelet on her wrist, slowly, reverently, like it was made of gold, but joy, like the fall sunlight, was fleeting. The band had just struck up a fiddle tune when a voice cut through the air like a snapped wire. "Eleanor?" Ellie froze. Noah turned. A woman stood across the grass, elegant in a way that didn't belong in Meadow Run. Cashmere coat, pearl earrings, and the expression of someone used to getting answers. "Eleanor Margaret McAllister." The woman asked again, louder this time. Ellie took a small step back, the color draining from her face. The music faded into background noise. Conversations around them slowed. Heads began to turn. Noah instinctively stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Ellie and the woman. "Who are you?" he asked evenly. "I'm Cassandra Vale," the woman replied. "I'm a legal representative of the McAllister family estate. We've been looking for Miss McAllister for over a year." Noah didn't blink. "Well, maybe she didn't want to be found." Cassandra's gaze shifted to Ellie. "You can't keep hiding. The land is in limbo. The board needs your decision. If you don't act soon, Oak River will be absorbed by state default." "I know what's at stake," Ellie said, voice barely above a whisper. "Then come back and face it." Ellie looked like she might shatter. Grace reached for her hand, but she didn't move. Noah saw the war inside her, the past clawing at the present, the fragile threads of healing threatening to unravel. He leaned in. "You don't have to decide anything today, but don't run. Not this time." Her eyes searched his, and for the first time she didn't flee. Instead she nodded once. "Take me home." They drove back in silence, Grace curled up in the back seat with her cider untouched, sensing the shift, even if she didn't understand it fully. Ellie sat rigid, her fingers tracing the letters on the bracelet. Brave. She didn't feel brave. She felt exposed, stripped. Noah parked beside the barn and turned off the engine. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the field, the golden hour tinged with uncertainty. Ellie turned to him. "You should—" "No, I left not because I was grieving. I left because they tried to control me. My uncles, the board, the lawyers, they saw me as a name on paper, not a person, just the next McAllister in line." He didn't speak, just listened. They wanted me to marry into the right family, sign the land over to the right development deal, smile in the newspaper and hold ribbon-cutting scissors. My mother had kept them at bay, but when she died, I became the means to an end. Her voice cracked. I didn't just run from the ranch. I ran from who they wanted me to be. Noah looked out at the land, miles of golden grass, old fences, and a house built by generations of hands that meant something. "Ellie," he said softly, "Oak River doesn't belong to them. It belongs to you." She looked away, afraid of the weight of that truth. But Noah pressed gently. "What would your mother want?" Ellie closed her eyes. "She'd want me to stand tall, even with shaking legs." Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. The silver feather. Pendant? He'd kept it with him. He held it out. "You dropped this before you were ready. Maybe now "It's time." Ellie took it, her fingers trembling. This time she didn't tuck it away. She put it on. That night she sat on the porch alone, while Grace slept inside and Noah cleaned up the tools left behind from the bunk project. The stars overhead shimmered like watchful ancestors, steady and patient. Ellie wrapped her arms around herself, the breeze cool against her skin, and whispered to the night, "I'm not ready, but I'm not running." Behind her, the porch light flickered on. Noah, quiet and steady as always. He didn't say a word. He just sat beside her, and for the first time in years, she let someone stay. The next morning, the ranch felt different. The air was still cool, the field still swayed with wind, but something subtle had shifted. It wasn't the kind of change you could see from a distance, but if you stood still long enough, you could feel it. Like a door once sealed had been cracked open. Ellie moved slowly through the kitchen, barefoot, her silver feather pendant swaying gently against her chest. She didn't speak much over breakfast, just stirred her coffee and stared out the window toward the barn, as if the land itself were asking her a question she hadn't figured out how to answer. Grace had gone with her grandmother to the library in town, giving Noah and Ellie a rare stretch of uninterrupted quiet. Noah stood by the back screen door, sipping coffee, watching the horizon. "You ever think land can remember things?" Ellie asked softly behind him. He turned, surprised by the question. "I think it remembers how it was treated, the way animals do, the way children do." Ellie nodded slowly. "Then this land remembers too much silence." Later that day, while Noah repaired a section of collapsed fencing near the pasture, Ellie disappeared into the attic of the ranch house. It had been years since she'd gone up there. The air was dry and laced with the scent of cedar and forgotten things. Dust particles danced in the beams of sunlight filtering through the small, circular window. Boxes were stacked neatly, her mother's doing, no doubt. Margaret McAllister had organized everything, even her grief. Ellie ran her fingers along the spines of old ledger books, a cracked leather saddlebag, a photograph in a brass frame of her as a child, holding a newborn calf with a smile so wide it startled her. Then, in a corner near a trunk labeled winter coats, she found a smaller box marked in cursive for EM, when you are ready. Her breath caught. She sank to her knees and opened it with trembling hands. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed in her mother's looping hand, dated from the last 6 months of her life. The first envelope was marked with just 2 words, "Start here." Noah found her on the back porch 2 hours later, the box beside her, her cheeks stained with dried tears. She didn't look up, just handed him the letter she'd just finished reading. He hesitated, then sat beside her and began to read aloud. "My Ellie, if you're reading this, then the land has called you back. And if you've listened, even a little, then I know I didn't fail you. You were never meant to carry this alone. The ranch is not just your inheritance, it's your permission to be who you are, to live at your own pace, to turn this place into something that reflects your heart, not your name. I know they'll come for it, the lawyers, the investors, the cousins you barely know, but the land, it won't answer to them. It only listens to the hands that care for it. So, if you stay, make it your own. Break tradition, plant wildflowers in the fields they said were for cattle, let kids run through the creeks, turn the barn into music if that's what you want. Let them call it wasteful, but you and I will know better. This land has held grief long enough. Let it hold joy again, and let it hold you. Always." Mama Noah folded the letter slowly, as if afraid to crease it wrong. He handed it back without speaking. Ellie looked at him, eyes red but full of clarity. She knew I'd run, she knew I'd come back, and she forgave me before I ever left. Noah nodded. "That's what mothers do." Ellie looked down at the letter again. "She gave me something I didn't think I had." "What's that?" "Permission." That evening, Ellie lit a fire in the old hearth and unpacked more of the letters. Grace had returned and now sat curled beside her, head resting on Ellie's shoulder as she read one aloud. This one about the apple orchard Margaret had once dreamed of planting along the eastern ridge. Why didn't she ever do it? Grace, asked Ellie, smiled softly. She ran out of time. Grace thought for a moment. Then maybe we can do it for her. Ellie's eyes welled again, but she nodded. Maybe we can. Later, after Grace was tucked into bed, Noah lingered on the porch with Ellie, the stars blazing overhead, the kind of quiet that was earned, not imposed, settling around them. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, Ellie said. About the board, the land, everything. You don't have to know yet, Noah said gently. But you don't have to face it alone either. Ellie turned toward him. You keep saying that, because it keeps being true. She studied him, as if trying to memorize the lines of his face, softened by fatigue, lit by the porch, light and something more tender. Noah, do you ever think some people are meant to find each other in the middle of their hardest chapters? He smiled faintly. I think sometimes the hardest chapters are the ones that bring us exactly where we're meant to be. There was a pause. Then Ellie reached out, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but slowly, surely, and placed her hand in his. Noah said nothing. He just closed his fingers gently around hers, and together they sat in the stillness, holding on to something that felt like both an ending and the beginning of something braver. The next morning, the world felt both ordinary and transformed. A light fog clung to the tops of the fields, moving like breath across the ridges. Birds stirred in the trees. Somewhere out in the distance, Lacey whinnied, waiting for someone to greet the day with her. Ellie stood at the kitchen sink, her fingers wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee that had gone cold. She hadn't slept much. Her mother's voice had followed her into her dreams, soft, firm, always the same message. You don't have to carry the weight the way I did. Let it become something else. Let it become you. Now, as morning slowly unfolded across Oak River, Ellie knew she couldn't delay any longer. She dressed with care, not in designer clothes or the crisp collared shirts the McAllister family used to require for proper appearances, but in jeans, boots still damp from yesterday's dew, and a thick navy sweater that belonged to her mother once. She tucked the silver feather pendant beneath the collar, close to her heart. Noah wasn't due to arrive until late morning. Grace was off with her grandmother again. The house was silent, and so Ellie moved through it deliberately, clearing the kitchen table, stacking the letters back into their box, placing the "Start Here" envelope at the top, just in case she ever forgot where the change began. Then she sat down to write. There wasn't a script for what she needed to say. No template, no safe legal phrasing to hide behind, just her truth. She took out a yellow legal pad and wrote in long, steady lines, her handwriting a little stiff at first, then more fluid, more sure with every word. To the ones who think I've forgotten, I didn't run from the land. I ran from the expectations that choked it. I left because grief demanded space, and no one in that house knew how to give it. I left because I needed to become more than an heir. I needed to become a person. I have returned, not to resume the past, but to rewrite the future. I will not sell the land. I will not hand it over to developers. I will not give it to men in suits who've never walked it barefoot at sunrise. I intend to live here, grow here, reclaim what this place once meant. If that doesn't fit into your board meetings or spreadsheets, then so be it. I didn't come back for approval. I came back for restoration, and I have found it. Not in contracts, but in the quiet kindness of strangers, in children who still believe the earth listens, in the way a horse softens at the sound of your voice when you finally stop yelling and start asking. Oak River is no longer a monument to family power. It is soil and memory. It is forgiveness and fire. It is mine. Do what you must. I will be here. And I will not run again. E. McAllister. She folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and addressed it simply to whom it may concern at the board. Then she placed the envelope on the dining room table, but beside it she left a second note, shorter, unsealed. This one was for someone else. Noah arrived just after 10, his truck kicking up dust as it turned into the long gravel drive. Ellie watched from the porch as he stepped out, brow furrowed slightly, eyes always scanning for her first, before anything else. She met him halfway down the steps. "Morning," he said, smiling. "Brought fence wire and some fresh apple fritters. Grace says they cure all emotional situations." Ellie gave a soft laugh, the kind that hummed low and real in her chest. "Thank you," she said. "But I won't be helping with repairs today." He raised an eyebrow. "Everything all right?" She nodded. "Everything's finally exactly where it needs to be." She didn't explain further, just reached into her back pocket and handed him the small note. "For you." Noah took it, glanced at the envelope. There was no name on it, just his silver feather pendant sketched lightly on the back in pencil. She turned then and walked toward the barn, where Lacey waited at the gate. She didn't look back. Noah stood for a long moment, then opened the note and read, "You were the first place I felt safe in years. You never asked who I used to be. You only asked if I was warm, if I was fed, if I wanted coffee. That mattered, more than you know. The land is mine now, officially, but it was never really about ownership. It was about choosing, and I choose this life, this place, and maybe, if you still want to, this heart. Not today, not rushed, but gently, honestly. You once told me the land only listens to the hands that care for it. I think hearts are the same way. You have a way of listening, Noah Carter, so I'll keep whispering. Until you answer, Ellie." He folded the note and tucked it into his chest pocket like something sacred. Then he looked up and saw her walking the fence line with Grace, the little girl skipping ahead, Lacey trotting just behind them. The fog was gone. The sky had cleared, and Noah knew with a quiet certainty that needed no words. Something had begun, not with a kiss, not with a confession, but with a letter left behind, and a future finally stepping forward. The first shoots came up in the second week of November, a row of young trees, apple, cherry and wild plum, planted along the eastern ridge, just where Margaret McAllister had once dreamed they'd be. Ellie had read the orchard plan in one of her mother's letters and followed it down to the spacing and the soil amendments. Each sapling was a small act of defiance. Each root in the ground was a quiet prayer. She had started reclaiming the land, but more importantly, she had started reclaiming herself. The barn had been swept out and reopened. The west pasture was now home to a rescued mare and 2 goats named Sugar and Charlie. Grace, naturally, had adopted them as confidants and co-conspirators in her afternoon adventures. Ellie, always more comfortable in the background, had begun drawing up plans to open a riding therapy program in the spring, something she and her mother once whispered about before the cancer made dreams harder to chase. Noah was there most days, never imposing, never asking for more than what was offered. He repaired fence lines, replaced cracked floorboards in the barn, and taught Grace how to change a tire in the backlot behind the hay bales. He never once mentioned the letter Ellie had written him, but she knew he carried it. She could tell by the way he looked at her now, not with uncertainty, but with patience, the kind of love that waits because it knows. One crisp afternoon, Ellie and Grace stood at the orchard, admiring the tiny flags marking where more trees would go in the spring. "I think Nana would have liked this," Grace said, kicking at the loose soil with her boot. "She would have loved it," Ellie replied. "Especially the part where we don't care what the board thinks." Grace giggled. "They sound boring." "They are," Ellie said with a smile, "but they're not the problem anymore." And she believed that. For the first time in a long while, she truly believed the past had released its grip on her, until the envelope arrived. It was a manila envelope, thick and official-looking, delivered not by courier, but by the town's postman, who wore a puzzled expression when he handed it over. Didn't know anyone still lived out this far, he said. Tipping his cap, Ellie took the envelope without comment and waited until she was alone to open it. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a letter from the McAllister board, dry, legal, and full of cautious language about recognizing Miss McAllister's formal reinstatement as the rightful executor of Oak River Ranch Holdings. She skimmed it, unsurprised. The second document made her chest tighten. It was a scanned copy of her birth certificate, and beneath the familiar fields, her full name, birth date, place of birth, was one detail she had never seen before. Father, unknown, until now. Someone had filled in the blank. Father, Weston Fielding. She stared at the page for a long time, breath coming slower, heavier. Weston Fielding. The man who had shown up at Noah's garage, the man who had called her Eleanor with such unnatural familiarity. The board's favored legal counsel, her mother's former estate manager, and if this was true, her father. A man who had never claimed her, never written, never whispered truth, until now when the land had meaning again. That night, the wind howled across the ranch, and Ellie sat on the porch in her mother's old sweater, the letter on her lap like a stone she couldn't put down. Noah arrived after dinner, as usual, carrying 2 mugs of cider and an expression that knew better than to ask questions too soon. She didn't speak right away. He didn't rush her. Eventually, she handed him the envelope. He read it, slowly, carefully. His jaw tightened. But he said nothing until he had finished. When he looked up, there was no judgment in his eyes, only steady warmth. "You okay?" he asked. Ellie shook her head. "I don't know what to feel." "Then feel everything," he said gently. "You don't have to sort it out tonight." She looked out across the darkened fields, their edges soft with moonlight. "Why now, Noah? Why tell me now?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "Because you're no longer the girl who ran. You're the woman who stayed. Maybe he thought you were finally strong enough to hold the truth." She laughed bitterly. How generous of him. Noah shifted closer on the porch swing. "Truth isn't always a gift from the one who gives it. Sometimes it's a gift you give yourself by surviving it." She looked at him. "What if I don't want him in my life?" "Then you don't owe him that," Noah said without hesitation. "Blood makes a connection, but love builds a home." Ellie turned her head, and her eyes shone with something halfway between grief and peace. "You always know the right thing to say," she whispered. He reached out, took her hand, this time not tentative, just sure. "I don't always know," he said, "but I know when someone's finally come home." The following morning, Ellie drafted another letter. This one was shorter than the last. "To Weston Fielding, you may be my father, but you are not my home. I am not returning to your boardrooms or your version of this land. I have planted something here, something you cannot inherit or control. You don't get to claim me now, but you can know this. I am not broken, I am not gone. I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. Do not come to the ranch again. If you need something, write, but you won't find what you're looking for here. Ellie McAllister." She folded the letter, walked it down to the mailbox, and sent it off like a final breath of a storm that had been chasing her for years. By the time Noah arrived later that day, Ellie was planting marigolds near the porch. "I thought they'd look good here," she said, wiping her brow. "They already do," he replied. He knelt beside her, helped dig a hole, and together they pressed another root into the soil, side by side, still not rushing, but finally beginning to bloom. The first snow hadn't fallen yet, but the air hinted at it, sharp around the edges, tinged with something clean and inevitable. The sky had the color of steel dipped in silver, but Ellie McAllister's heart was anything but cold. For the first time in years, Oak River Ranch was not silent. There were voices, laughing, calling, echoing off the barn walls like they belonged there. Kids ran through the fields in borrowed boots. Elderly neighbors sipped cider from tin mugs and stood shoulder to shoulder near the newly repaired fences, gazing out at the land like it had risen from slumber. It was opening day, not a grand reopening, not a press event, just Ellie's way, gentle, grounded, honest. She called it the Oak River Open Gate Day. No speeches, no ribbon cutting, just an open gate, a warm fire, and a quiet welcome to anyone who needed a second chance. Noah arrived early, with Grace, the truck bed loaded with folding chairs, firewood, and 2 crockpots of chili. Grace ran ahead, a flurry of braids and mittens, and immediately found Sugar the goat, who had become something of a mascot for the ranch's revival. "Sugar gets more attention than I do," Noah teased, as he handed Ellie a crate of donated blankets. Ellie smiled, soft and bright. "Sugar didn't write a speech." "You did?" Noah blushed slightly. "You said no speeches." She tilted her head. "I said I wasn't giving one." He raised an eyebrow. "So I'm the bait." "You're the heart," she said simply. He didn't reply, but he didn't need to. The look between them held more than any microphone ever could. By midday, the barn was alive with people. Volunteers had helped string soft white lights across the beams. Hay bales doubled as seating. A local bluegrass duo played by the tack room, and children painted wooden horses at a crafts table set up under the awning. In the south pasture, Ellie had arranged for Lacey and 2 other therapy horses to be brought out one at a time. People lined up, not just kids, but adults too. Quiet, hesitant, wide-eyed. Some had never touched a horse in their lives. Some had grown up with them and lost that piece of their hearts somewhere along the way, and here they were rediscovering it. Noah found Ellie just after 3, standing by the barn door, her arms crossed, a mug of cider in hand. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, watching the crowd. "Better than okay. It feels like my mother's dream is breathing again. Only this time it's mine too." He stepped beside her. "She'd be proud. She'd tell me my boots were muddy, and my hair was a mess," he chuckled, "but her eyes would say everything else." Ellie looked at him then, really looked, her eyes reflecting the sun where it peeked through the clouds. "This is what I was afraid of," she admitted. He frowned gently. "What?" "Letting people in, letting the land become more than just something I protect, but now I see it." He waited. "I see that healing is not about building walls. It's about building tables, open gates, places where people show up even if they don't know how to fix anything." Noah smiled. "Sounds like a good place to stay." Ellie met his gaze. "Sounds like a place to love." At sundown, the music faded, lanterns flickered to life around the porch, and guests began saying their goodbyes. Some lingered, offering to come back and help with fencing, with the orchard, with the horses. A few dropped folded bills into the donation jar marked Grace's Future Riding School, scrawled in Grace's handwriting. By the time the last car pulled away down the gravel road, the ranch had returned to stillness. But a new kind. Not empty, full, lived in, held. Ellie stood in the barn's open doorway, hands on her hips, looking out at the quiet stars now blinking into the sky one by one. Noah came to stand beside her, hands in his jacket pockets. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she corrected, "and I'm not just talking about today." He nodded. She turned to him, voice softer now. "Noah, I meant every word in that letter, but I haven't said it out loud, and I think I need to." He turned toward her. "I choose this life," she said, "not because I have to stay, but because I want to. I want the land, the noise, the work," and she took a breath. "I want you." He reached out and brushed a strand of wind-blown hair from her face. "You already have me." Their hands met first, then their foreheads, then finally their lips, soft, steady, without fanfare. Just truth. Later, they sat on the porch steps, Grace curled between them, her head on Ellie's shoulder, already half asleep. Ellie looked out at the darkened land, lit by lanterns, moonlight, and something she couldn't name but finally recognized. It wasn't just a second chance. It was the beginning of belonging. The winter passed quietly, like a hush between heartbeats. Snow fell in steady silences, covering the ranch in a soft white coat. But even beneath the stillness, things were happening. Roots were deepening. Fences held strong. And inside the barn, Lacey gave birth to a colt. A wide-eyed little creature Grace insisted on naming Hope, because that's what he looks like. Noah built new shelves in the tack room. Ellie painted the porch the pale blue her mother always loved, and the orchard, though still young, survived its first freeze. Against all odds, everything was growing, and when spring finally came, it came all at once. On a morning washed in birdsong and sunlight, Ellie stood barefoot in the dew-covered grass, eyes closed, listening to the land. She didn't think about the board anymore. She didn't think about Weston Fielding, whose only reply to her letter had been a terse line of legal acknowledgement and a check she never cashed. She didn't think about the girl she used to be, the one who ran, who hid, who thought silence was safety. She thought only of now, of the horse breathing behind her, of the man beside her, of the girl laughing in the orchard, coaxing blossoms from branches with stories and song. The grand opening of Oak River's Therapeutic Riding Center was set for the first Saturday of May, but Ellie refused to call it a launch. "It's not a business," she told Noah. "It's an invitation." So they wrote letters instead of flyers. They knocked on doors instead of buying ads. They asked the school if any kids needed an outlet. They spoke with the VA office in the next town over, and word spread, not fast, but true. The morning of the event, Noah walked into the newly renovated barn and stopped dead in his tracks. Dozens of folded letters, handwritten, some smudged, some decorated with stickers and crayon drawings, lined the wall near the entrance, each pinned with a clothespin to a line of twine. He picked one at random and opened it. "I've never been around horses, but I think they might be kinder than most people." Lillian, age 62, another read, "I just want to ride once. For my daughter. She loved horses. I miss her. Bark, Father." Noah swallowed hard and glanced across the barn to Ellie, who was tying a welcome banner above the doors. "You didn't tell me," he said. She shrugged. "People carry things they don't know how to say. Sometimes writing it down is a start." He walked over and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You're building more than a ranch here," she smiled. "I'm just answering what the land asked for." By mid-afternoon, the ranch was full of stories. A teenage girl with autism rode Lacey in slow circles while her mother sobbed softly behind a fence post. A widower brushed the colt, Hope, with hands that once only built furniture and graves. A teacher led a group of at-risk boys through a mindfulness walk among the new orchard trees. Grace led a tour for the local 4-H club, proudly pointing out every stall like a museum guide. And Noah sat beside Ellie beneath the cottonwood her mother planted 30 years ago and didn't say a word. He didn't have to. As twilight approached and the last visitors filtered out with promises to return, Ellie stood by the barn doors, eyes shining with something that wasn't quite tears. "This," she whispered to Noah, "is what I couldn't see before." He tucked a piece of her hair behind her ear. "And now I see everything." They stood in silence as the sun lowered over the ridge, painting gold across the land. Then, slowly, Noah pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small wooden box, weathered smooth with time. Ellie raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" He opened it. Inside was a ring, simple silver with a tiny engraving of a feather along the inside band. Her breath caught. "I'm not asking for promises," Noah said. "Not ones you're not ready for. I'm not even asking you now." Ellie looked up at him, eyes full of memory and something soft and certain. "I'm ready," Noah smiled. Then I'm asking. She didn't cry. She didn't make a speech. She just held out her hand. They married in June under the same cottonwood, with Grace standing between them in a dress she picked out herself. Ellie wore boots. Noah wore his father's tie. The ring fit perfectly. There was no string quartet, no media, no estate guests, just friends, volunteers, neighbors, and the land. The land watched and held them all. On the last page of the guest book, a visitor had written in pen, "This place doesn't just give second chances. It reminds you why you wanted one in the first place." That night, as the lanterns swayed in the warm evening breeze and the stars spilled like stories across the dark, Ellie sat with Grace and Noah on the porch swing. The orchard was blooming behind them. The barn was quiet. The horses had been fed, and the wind whispered through the grass the way it always had. Only now someone was listening. The trees bore fruit. The children rode. The laughter returned. And one morning, Noah found Ellie in the garden, holding a tiny baby blanket in her hands, tears on her cheeks, joy in her eyes. She looked up at him and whispered, "Looks like we're going to need a bigger porch." He laughed, lifted her into his arms, and spun her slowly in the sunlight. The land didn't just hold stories anymore, it held a future. And finally, the house was full, a spring with enough people. If you've made it here to the very end of this story, thank you truly. This wasn't just a story about a ranch or even about love. It was a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, can plant seeds that grow into something extraordinary. Before you go, let me ask you this. Where are you watching from? Was there a moment in the story that touched your heart or stayed with you afterward? I'd love to hear from you in the comments, really. I read every one of them, and they mean more than you might think. And if you enjoy stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark, consider subscribing to the channel. Here we don't rush through tales. We tell them slowly, gently, so they can sink in and maybe even heal something along the way. Thank you for watching. Wherever you are in the world, I hope your evening is peaceful or your morning is bright, and that you carry a little more hope with you than before. Until next time, there's always another story waiting.